Hello, welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. I'm your host, Tyrone Marshall, joined today by Samuel Luckhurst. We are back in the studio for the first time in what feels like about 4 years. Back doing in-person podcasts. We did do a few of these in-person ones on the US tour. It's fair to say the studio has slightly better facilities than the hotel rooms we were using in New York and San Diego and Las Vegas. It's been another busy week for Manchester United as well. 2 friendlies this weekend on the back of their US tour. We were both at Old Trafford on Saturday for the Lawns game. Samuel went to Dublin yesterday for the Athletic Bilbao game. Samuel, probably a good place to start. How was Dublin and how was the game?
I think the first thing I should say is that we both look better on this podcast than we did on the last podcast. We were both extremely tired in San Diego. Dublin was like Manchester. It was very rainy. The last thing I remember to take with me was my waterproof coat, so I was glad I had that in tow. But it's good when United play these games out in big cities in the UK, because the fan bases are obviously big, especially in Ireland. There are a lot of Irish fans that were not happy with the squad, but it's still on that approach to the Aviva Stadium. We've got a lot of pubs and it's easy to get a drink. It does have a bit of a cup final atmosphere about it, even for just a friendly. It was a little bit similar to Cardiff 4 years ago when they played Milan. Anyone who's been to the Principality Stadium will know what a great location that is for any game, never mind a friendly. So I think that's the last of the travelling until the Champions League group stage starts now, at least. So relieved for that.
Yes, and at least it's the Champions League and not the Europa League this season, so slightly simple trips. In terms of the game, a 1-1 draw for Facundo Pellestri's late equaliser. I suppose a good place, well, not a good place to start, but maybe the obvious place to start is with a negative. He does seem to have become the pantomime villain on these tours and these friendlies at the moment. Poor old Harry Maguire. I mean, not his finest moment for the goal, it'd be fair to say.
Yeah, over land and sea, the boos just seem to follow him from, what was it, Melbourne, America, over the Irish Sea now as well. I did feel sorry for him in that it is unwarranted, it is unjust. He actually got quite a good ovation when they broke off from the lineup just prior to kick-off, and he went over to some supporters, applauded them, got a good ovation back. One mistake later, it was booing, and the boos subsided. And there were some fans that were cheering, trying to encourage him and trying to drown out the boos. But then they resurfaced in the second half, and you suspect a few people who were booing him were in an inebriated state. But speaking frankly as well, there were quite a lot of clownish supporters at the game yesterday, and I wouldn't put that down as a reliable gauge whatsoever of although they were match goers and they were attending a United match, I don't ever think that Maguire will ever get booed at Old Trafford. I mean, if ever there was a season that he was going to get booed, it was the Solskjaer and Rangnick one. And there was the time when he got sarcastically cheered off against Atletico Madrid, but he's never been booed. And when he did he got booed by England fans at the time, which was risible given what a brilliant player he's been for England. And the following game at Old Trafford against Leicester, United fans chanted his rather crass chant for the only time I think I can ever remember it being aired at Old Trafford. So it was a mistake by him for Williams' goal. It was a pass that just wasn't on, and Athletic were quite, they were quite ruthless in the way they took the goal. But that was the story. There weren't a lot of us. I think there were only 2 of us, in fact, that flew over on that infamous budget airline to Dublin yesterday for the game. So I suppose that did soften it. It would have helped Maguire that there was the Community Shield going on in terms of the coverage. But I suppose if you're his agent and you take interest in what Man United fans are saying, and you take interest in what your client's well-being is like, Twitter would have been a place to steer clear of yesterday. But credit to Maguire, he had the resilience to keep going. He got the assist for Facundo Pellestri's goal. So although he looks done at United. I mean, he lost his place last year, lost the captaincy last month. He's lost the confidence of his manager. He's lost the confidence of the supporters. But he still has some resilience about him, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with him now, because I think it's in his best interest to leave, and it's also in England's best interest for him to leave, because he's been brilliant for them at 3 tournaments, and there's another one just around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, it is a remarkable situation, really, when you think it's 2 years and just over 2 years since his injury for the Europa League final was considered a major issue for United, and United fans are almost on Maguire watching, and is he going to be fit? And this is a problem for the Europa League final. Got back fit and was genuinely world class in the Euros that summer, and now is just portrayed as this sort of clownish figure to be booed everywhere. I mean, like I say, it has to be in his interest to leave. I guess the problem is he didn't want to go to West Ham 2 weeks ago, and almost certainly won't want to go now, and it looks like David Moyes is on borrowed time there. So a difficult situation to resolve, but it certainly feels like it's in the interests of both parties to have a fresh start. I guess in terms of positives for the game, some players who might have a slightly longer future. Facundo Pellistri with the goal. Hannibal looking quite bright after he came on. 2 young players making something of an impact.
Yeah, the tone of the piece I did change with the goal, in that it was just going to be straight. Some United careers have probably ended here, and I think in the case of Van der Beek's, that is done and dusted, and it really needs to be. Just I don't know what really goes through his mind, and you look at his Instagram post last night, and it's just so tone deaf. It's like you were the only player taken off at half time. Don't post anything. But not only has he posted something that gives the illusion that he had a really good time in Dublin when he didn't, but his agent posts a comment on it, like with a love heart and a fire emoji, that also gives the illusion that he actually played well, and he didn't. He was just out of kilter, as he has been pretty much the whole of his United career. And the first thing that Mejbri came on, that he did when he came on, was to press, and that was right by Athletic Bilbao's goal line. He went out for a goal kick. Okay, he's not won a corner, but the intent is there, and he gets up to speed immediately like that. And he forced the red card as well, that gave United an advantage that probably allowed them to get an equaliser late on. When you look at a player who's going to be rotated at times with Fernandes, or give Fernandes a breather here and there, it's a very simple choice there, and you go with Mejbri. And I think I said that after the Oslo game at the start of pre-season. And I know pre-season is pre-season, but we all know what Van der Beek's like. His card was marked 2 years ago when he tried to go to Everton on loan. When you're trying to go to Everton on loan at that stage of your career, your United career, your numbers up. Everyone knows you're not up to it. If you're looking to go somewhere where it's more comfortable and not going to be as stressful, then you're not up to it. And unfortunately, he's followed a similar career trajectory to David Klaassen in some ways, but he's actually been worse than David Klaassen in the Premier League. So he was another negative in terms of a probable outgoing, with Real Sociedad in for him. But Pellistri was bright. He deserved his goal. He was probably the most threatening attacker before he did score. He drew a number of fouls, a lot of cynical challenges on him. I just really like him. I mean, a couple of us spoke to him afterwards as well, and the quotes, people listening to this, the quotes have probably been published by now. But he's a really likeable lad. He's very polite. He's a good professional. It's easy to forget he only made his United debut in January, but I think he's only had 10 competitive games for United, but in most of those games, you've come away from it thinking he's done something there that has been noteworthy. And there have been a number of friendly games where he's done quite well. I think he's scored a few goals in friendlies now. I think I remember Derby a couple of years ago, and was it Bangkok last year against Liverpool? He scored as well. So when he gets an opportunity, he tends to take it, and it's still unclear whether he will stay or go. And when I say go, he's not going to be sold. But when you look at the situation with the attack at the moment, Marshall, I mean, you mention his name and people just roll their eyes or despair. They can't play him, they can't sell him. Ahmad is nursing a knee injury, having twisted his ankle in New Jersey against Arsenal. Van der Beek is out of the picture and will be off the book soon as well, probably for United. So really, you can't afford to let any other attacker go. And Pellistri has worth as a squad player. If you're chasing a game or if you need a goal, I think he's a pretty good option to bring on. And you've got 5 substitutes to use as well these days. So at the start of the summer, I think people would have looked at the situation and thought, yep, fair enough, he goes on loan, that's fine. But it's always felt as though with him and Ahmad, they can't accommodate both of them. And so the way it's going at the moment, because unfortunately of Ahmad's injury against Arsenal, although he was on the bench a couple of days later and now it's a separate issue with his knee, it seems like Pellistri's in the driving seat there. And again, he's probably had a bit more first-team exposure with United across competitive games and friendlies. And he certainly made more of an impression in those games. I mean, when would the last time of Ahmad... When did Ahmad actually last play for United? It might have been one of Rangnick's first games, young boys, I think, in the Champions League group. So you're going back to December 2021. So Ten Hag is not as familiar with him. And unfortunately, the timing of his injury is possibly a bit of a killer. And he had this 2 years ago when he was going to go on loan to Feyenoord, and then he got injured late on in the window. So with Pellistri at the moment, I think that it would be counterproductive to be trying to get him out of the club when there's a hell of a lot to like there, and he's still quite young. He's still only 21, so it's still fair to call him, although he's got a World Cup under his belt and he's been a United player for nearly 3 years. It is fair to call him a young player, and it's just now a case of whether Ten Hag feels the time is right to maximise him.
Yeah, and he feels a bit of a point of difference in terms of wingers. Pellistri, doesn't he? He's a bit more old-fashioned, I guess you'd say.
He's right footed, plays on the right, isn't he?
Running with the ball, taking people on, trying to get to the byline, something you don't see a lot from wingers these days. That was the second of the double-header this weekend. It started with Lens. I guess it started pretty badly as well. There's a fair bit of schadenfreude around half an hour in.
Your succinct summary of it was perfect.
Yeah, they'd unveiled a new £72 million striker who was injured, £60 million midfielder missed an open goal from 6 yards, and the £47 million goalkeeper lobbed from the centre circle. It wasn't going brilliantly. Credit to United for turning it round, and in the end, there were quite a lot of positives from that game. They looked good going forward. Second half, both wingers had good second halves. Garnacho, I thought, had a good whole game, really, and I mean, it feels like. We'll talk about Wolves later in the week, or you will, I'm on holiday. But it feels like...
Unfortunately, I have to talk about Wolves game.
Yeah, another Man United Wolves game. I mean, it feels like we could pick that starting 11 now for that game. And Garnacho has made that spot on the left his own, hasn't he? Obviously, the injury to Hojlund, Marshall's continuing unavailability means Rashford has to play centrally. It was maybe between Garnacho and Sancho for the left, but Garnacho's won that battle hands down.
Yeah, so. There's no contest there. And in fairness to Sancho, he's been playing in a different position in pre-season. But when you're at the age, he'd have still been 18 at the time in the cup final, I think, and you're the only Man United player who has Man City on the back foot in a season that they've won the treble, you've got to be promoted a little bit more. And you know, it's not a case of the stars have aligned, but it does benefit him that the striker that they've signed happens to be injured. So, you know, Rashford is being accommodated rather than Sancho, which you think, okay, fair enough. Rashford is more experienced playing there. I don't think he's necessarily particularly good there, and Sancho has looked okay there in pre-season. But it's interesting that a lot of fans are probably having that debate over Rashford and Sancho, but looking at Garnacho and saying, but he absolutely has to start in that first game. And he has had a good pre-season. He obviously, pre-season last year was non-existent for him. But the rise that he's enjoyed over the last 18 months from the start of the Youth Cup run, it feels like, it's nothing short of extraordinary. And he is a player that, when he's playing, you hear the seats clattering against the backs because he brings fans off them, and that's the true sign of a Man United winger. Everyone knows about wingers and Man United and how it's almost that. I think that's what made Van Gaal's football such anathema to United supporters. It's because there was no wing play, there was no excitement, but Garnacho absolutely embodies that. And under Ten Hag, he's got the right manager there as well. You don't look at him and think he might go the way of Januzaj, who was of course really good in his first season, but then just faded very, very quickly. There's just so much to like about him, and the ceiling is really, really high. So they've got to absolutely make the most of it before he agitates to move to Real Madrid in four years or so. So yeah, that's the problem for United. You can see that coming a mile off if he continues on this trajectory. But look, if he's anything like Ronaldo was in his first 6-year spell at United, then they'll have done all right.
Yeah, and just lastly from the Lens game, let's talk about Mason Mount. An underwhelming pre-season, I guess it'd be fair to say. Yeah. I mean, it is only pre-season. I thought you summed it up quite well actually on Saturday when you said he's probably a player who's better without the ball than he is with it. And you can tell that every manager he plays under seems to absolutely love him. So he clearly brings something to the collective, but it sometimes, I guess, can be hard to see for fans. It can be hard to see for us when we've got our heads buried in laptops sometimes. Yeah. But he's not had a brilliant pre-season, has he? Yeah,
and it doesn't help when you miss a glaring chance like he did as well. And I think he's quite sensitive to the backlash he gets off Chelsea supporters, because he was seen as, one, I hate the phrase, but one of their own, and they had a banner of him because he came through the academy and won the Champions League, but in the end he decided to join United. From United supporters' perspective as well, and also from journalistic perspective where we're analysing him, everyone knows that Ten Hag wanted Frenkie de Jong last year, and we were very, very reliably informed as well that if he could sign, this was going back to the winter, that if he could sign anyone in the world, it'd be Jude Bellingham. It was never attainable. It was a bit of a pipe dream. But anyway, Mount, I don't ever see getting anywhere near their level, which immediately, some people might say, well, how's he going to succeed at United then if they pursued this midfielder last year and this other midfielder who was really virtuoso in his half against United in Houston? They've both eluded them. So already Mount is up against the cosh, and where he's pre-season, as you say, it has been underwhelming. I mean, the most striking impact I recall him making so far in pre-season was probably when he led a pressing against Leeds United in Oslo, and that was the first game, and it's Leeds United, and it's a nothing game. So at least with friendlies you can be a little bit dismissive of it and say, okay, you're getting your game time up, but make sure that you perform when the competitive games start. But I think a lot of United fans might be on his case quite quickly, because, as I said, it's so well documented that there were starrier names that Ten Hag would have liked, De Jong in particular. But also it's just the fact that I look at Mount and I don't see him as... I mean, he's not a particularly similar player to Frenkie de Jong either. De Jong is a dribbler. When he was starting out in the Netherlands, he was playing at centre-back and dribbling out from centre-back. He's a very different player. And when I use that phrase about being better without the ball than with the ball, the last player I think I used that phrase with was, and this does not bode well, was Jesse Lingard. Occasionally he was very good with the ball in the, he had that goal in the Community Shield when he went the dribble, and Watford was another one. But he was very intuitive with his movement when he didn't have it, and if there was a chance there to hit it first time, he was liable to score the spectacular. But if you gave him time, his limitations were quite obvious. And the way United were working at the way they were functioning at the weekend was good. Without the ball, it looked like they were more of a 4-3-3, and they had Fernandes and Mount high up to maximise their pressing. And look, they need to improve their pressing. They did last season, but there's still a hell of a lot more room for improvement. And look, Mount is a player who is completely aligned with what Ten Hag wants from a younger, dynamic midfielder. But I do wonder whether he's going to be creative enough to really take them on to the next level. And it is still early days, and although it sounds like we're judging him, we're not really, because we've already added that caveat that it is pre-season and he will be judged when the competitive games start. but he's not hit the ground running in pre-season. So he's got a second chance now to hit the ground running against Wolves next week, and from then on, it would be fair to to judge him through those competitive matches.
That's all for the first part of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll be back after the break to talk about Rasmus Hojlund. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. The Lens friendly on Saturday kicked off at 12:45pm, but the real fun began at the unusual time of 12:37pm, which was the moment the arrival of Rasmus Hojlund was choreographed. United dropping the press release to us at 12:37 and unveiling him on the pitch at exactly the same time, a military-like operation. A signing we all knew was coming, not done in time, unfortunately, for this weekend. But then we learned it doesn't matter anyway because he's injured and is out for a few weeks. We're told he is training, but he's short of match fitness and we'll need a couple of weeks to get up to speed. First of all, the signing. I guess we all knew it was coming, didn't we? And unveiled on the pitch, that seems to be a thing United have done a lot of recently. Varane against Leeds, Casemiro against Liverpool. Now Hojlund against Lens, bodes well for Leicester next season, I guess. It's he got a warm reception. He looked delighted to be there. He's made a big thing of this being a boyhood United fan, hasn't he?
Yeah, it was unfortunate for him in a way that it was a friendly, because the the applause was compared to Casemiro and Varane. Their unveilings were prior to highly charged games. I mean, the Leeds game, it was the first game that Old Trafford was packed again since the pandemic, and the Liverpool one, Brentford had happened 9 days earlier. There were protests going on outside, so it was an evening kickoff as well. You could really feel it in the air that night. To quote Phil Collins, I believe it was. That was unintended. So it was polite applause for him, but I suppose it was somewhat tempered by United then informing us that he's not going to be available probably for the first two games. You may be looking at Forest at home on the 26th as a possible debut, and you'd think maybe as a substitute. So it's not ideal when you've just invested £72 million in a striker, and Ten Hag apparently didn't want to talk him up, and then he told MUTV that he's the player, the striker the players have been waiting for. So if you're talking about hype, that is one way of hyping him up. But I think United and Ten Hag are going to be preaching caution quite a lot, stressing that he is 20, he's going to require time. I think they said that again at the weekend. I think they're conscious that they have spent a lot of money on a striker who is not a proven goal scorer, and I think that's what we said going into the transfer window. They needed to sign a dependable goal scorer, and you cannot factually say that they've got that in Hojlund. They might get it. He may be a superstar for them, and I think from what we gather from what Ten Hag has said about him, he's completely convincing him in terms of his personality, his physicality, his speed, the way he operates along the front line, the desire of him as well, the willingness. I mean, he is obviously playing for his boyhood club now as well, so that's going to be an added motivation. It will be fascinating to see how he fares, but whether it's good enough for Man United this season is another thing altogether. I think we said in the States that if he scored 15 Premier League goals this season, that would be really good going for someone who got 9 goals in 32 Serie A games last season. But would it be good enough for United? I mean, United are not really... Ten Hag is being very cagey about what constitutes a good season for United. He's refusing to outright say that they should be going for the title. I think that is possibly a stretch, but then you look at the other clubs, and even City, they've got issues, and some very good players have left, and there are still maybe some holes in the squad that need filling, and there's uncertainty about other players. Liverpool lost a couple of players. A couple of players have come in, but their squad is probably not in the shape that that Klopp would want it to be. Arsenal, can they sustain their momentum? Newcastle have made 1 or 2 decent signings, but already I don't I don't think people would be surprised if they faded out of the top four picture there. So maybe there's an opportunity there for United, but we would certainly be a lot more bullish about about that opportunity if they had someone like Harry Kane in instead. And regardless of what happens with Kane, whether he goes to Bayern Munich, whether he stays at Tottenham, unfortunately Hojlund is going to be compared with his peers at the other big clubs, and that is Erling Haaland, Harry Kane. Okay, at Liverpool, there's not a standout striker anymore, but you've still got, Darwin Núñez, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a better season. Salah's still there. Arsenal, it's a bit different, where Gabriel Jesus has not been as good a sign as I think as they might have hoped, and he's injured as well. But you just mentioned names Haaland and Kane, and already that is pressure. That is added pressure to the pressure of leading the line for Man United. And as I said, we've been told that Ten Hag is completely convinced in his ability to handle it. And I think he did say that as well privately, that Hojlund was able to cope with the stresses. He feels that that's not going to be a problem. But I still don't think that for any person, any player, whether it's a manager, a player, or even a kit man or a tea lady going to Manchester United, they almost all of them get a shock as to the size of it and the scrutiny and the criticism when it does come. And there will be criticism of him at times. There's not been a player in United's history who's had zero criticism. All the greats have had criticism at one point or another. So it'll be fascinating to see how it goes. But it is a genuine pity for United that he's injured. It's not an ideal start.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Especially when your other striker is also injured or not match fit, and unlikely to be match fit if he's never playing matches. Exactly, yeah. And there's a huge fascination with Hojlund. There was a lot of Danish press there at Old Trafford on Saturday. I did Danish TV before the match, and the one thing they kept coming back to was pressure and this idea of pressure. And there is, as you've touched on there, a huge element of it here. This is a monstrous step up for a player, pretty inexperienced. He's played 87 professional games. He moved for 1.8 million euros, I think, 18 months ago from Copenhagen to Sturm Graz. 17 million euros last summer. Now 85 million.
And United said, we've tracked him since Copenhagen as well. But we waited until he was worth about 90 million euros to go.
We've tracked him since he scored a hat-trick for Denmark in March. Doesn't quite have the same ring to it. They clearly needed a striker, but 9 goals last season in Serie A, under the radar at Atalanta. I think there was even a feeling at Atalanta that after that hat-trick for Denmark, and I think he got 2 goals in his next cap in those March internationals, and that's when the noise about a summer move really accelerated, and he ended the season pretty poorly, I think, at Atalanta. The pressure element is also almost going to be the defining thing to his first season here, isn't it? The defining aspect. You mentioned before, if he gets 15 goals, fantastic. Yeah. But United probably need 25 goal a season striker, don't they? And it is going to be, how he copes with the demands off the pitch and the spotlight and the glare is going to be as big as his actual attributes, because he does actually look well suited to the Premier League. But it's just for a 20-year-old with such limited experience to come in and be, he won't wear the number 9, but essentially he's the Manchester United number 9. It's a huge ask, isn't it?
Yeah, huge. Berbatov was a club record striker signing in, what year was that? 2008, and his first season he only got 14 goals. That was a genuine disappointment. For someone who'd been playing for Tottenham, been very good for Tottenham the previous 2 years, he knew the Premier League, but it's that big step up. Whether you're at quite a big club like Tottenham or at Atalanta, are not one of the big hitters in Italy, it's fair to say. Whatever the standing, it's going to be a huge step up to United, and it's interesting that Danish media are talking about that as well, because sometimes with certain territories and the fan bases, they can just be one-eyed. It's like if a player from their country or their territory goes to Manchester United, it's he's great, he's wonderful. An example of that would be how one-eyed some Norwegians are with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who he overachieves as United manager, but the more you think about it, the more ridiculous it was that he was Manchester United manager. And with Hojlund, as I said, I think what gives me a bit of confidence that he will do well at United is what Ten Hag has been saying about him. And that does put a different slant on it. And sometimes, I mean, Ten Hag was one of them as well, where there were certainly reservations about United going for a manager from the Eredivisie, huge step up, dealing with egos, new to the Premier League. And you've got Pochettino there as well as a possibility. Is he really the right man? And he absolutely was the right man. And sometimes you just speak to someone about something like that, and it puts a different slant on it. I remember speaking to Ten Hag's friend about him, and he used the word discipline quite a lot. And I thought, well, I think they might be all right here. If he can handle a dressing room, then fair enough. And of course, Ronaldo underestimated him and crossed him at his peril, and it cost him his competitive club career, really. So Ten Hag has shown at Ajax and at United he can develop rough diamonds, he can polish rough diamonds into real jewels. De Jong is one. De Ligt was better at Ajax than he was for Juventus and Bayern Munich as well. He actually looks like a player who misses Ten Hag. De Jong less so. And Garnacho is another one. So Ten Hag is building up this body of work with young players that suggests that United have got the right man to oversee Hojlund's development. And it's just a shame for all of us that he can't play as soon as possible, because you want to. Look, I hold my hands up. I've never watched him. I've never watched an Atalanta game with Hojlund playing, and I certainly during an international break don't go looking for a Denmark game to watch either. So we're just going to be judging him through the prism of what he does for Man United. What he did at Atalanta, Copenhagen, Sturm Graz is completely moot. So it's, as I said, it's going to be fascinating, but he's going to need a lot of help along the way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Ten Hag has earned the right and earned the trust to take a risk on these players, and I think this is probably the biggest transfer gamble so far. It feels like you mentioned he's playing down title talk before. I think they spent nearly £400 million now across 2 summers. It feels like they should be pretty close for that to happen. It's the 2 players it maybe depends most on are the 2 biggest risks, perhaps Anthony and Rasmus Hojlund.
It's €185 million, isn't it?
Yeah, 2 young forwards who Anthony needs to kick on from last season, and Hojlund needs to hit the ground running. And in terms of, we always knew a striker was the top priority this summer. It's come in at number 3 in terms of the process of signings. I guess the obvious question is Hojlund the right man? We know. We've said Ten Hag clearly wanted him. I think he probably wanted Harry Kane more. He is, like I say, he is going to be judged on what happens with Kane. Kane scored 4 goals for Tottenham in a friendly yesterday, at a time when he's desperate to leave the club. He is just a ruthless, reliable goal scorer. I mean, if he ends up going to Bayern for £85 million, that's £13 million more than United are spending on Hojlund. And as much as United say there was disadvantages with Kane, presumably his age in what is quite an ageing-ish squad, certainly the spine of it. There's a lot of 30, 31-year-olds there, but he's also, you'd bet your house on him outscoring Hojlund for the next 2 seasons, probably at least, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I can see it from both sides, and that United look at Kane, they think, right, he's one of the best to get, but we have to deal with Daniel Levy. There's no way this deal is going to get done early. He's 30. There's a lot of wear and tear there. Is he going to be a long-term striker? He's more likely to be a short-term striker. His salary demands as well have to be taken into account in compliance with FFP, etc. However, and also I suppose if Bayern Munich do sign him for £85 million, okay, but there's no way that Tottenham would let him go for that money to Man United. It would be minimum 9 figures. You're talking £100 million at the very least, and Levy would probably still then try and chance his arm and extract more from United. So the hassle would have been there. What I think United are overlooking is that they're bracketing Kane. They're saying, "Oh, look, we've signed all these elderly strikers in recent years, and look how it's gone with them." Kane has only just turned 30. It's a bit like that David Brent exchange with Tim in the office. Like, we're both in our 30s, and he's like, I've only just turned 30. You're what, 39? and to compare Kane at the stage in his career to Cavani it does Kane a disservice. And Ronaldo was what, 36 when he joined United. So that's more than half a decade's difference between the ages and when you're going there. Cavani obviously didn't work out, and it was also a deadline day move. There was a big element of panic about it. But there was another third. I mean, Ibrahimovic was 34 when he joined United, and he was a success, certainly his first season. So you can say that, we've signed all these elderly strikers, but Ronaldo was good in his first season. Cavani's first season actually ended really well as well. I think he got 17 goals in the end because of that purple patch he embarked on in the last couple of months of it. And Ibrahimovic was a success his first season. So however way you spin it, you can actually spin it as, well, look, there's evidence there that you can get a tune out of 30-something strikers, and this guy's only just turned 30, and also he's been a world-class striker for 7 or 8 years, and he's probably if he stays in the Premier League, he's going to get the goal scoring record as well. I think if United, if Osimhen was doable, I'd have understood United going for Osimhen because he is spectacular. He is prolific. He has all the attributes. He is proven. But when you shift from... And Kane and Osimhen were they were the top tier. And then they went down a tier to Hojlund and Randall Kolo-Muani as well. And of those two, Muani's got a better goal-scoring record. He's a France international. He was at the World Cup. Hojlund was not at the World Cup. I think he's 4 years older. Frankfurt wanted more. I think they were talking about 100 million euros. But when you look at the difference in price overall, it's not that big. And I know people at United have talked about you have to be conscious of actually paying another £10 million for a striker. But United had told us in America that they wouldn't spend more than £60 million on Hojlund, and then they spent £64 million on him. So that's £4 million more than they said they were going to pay. And so it always comes, however way you look at it, you can look at it in a negative way, you can look at it in a positive way, but ultimately, I always thought going into the transfer window, they needed a proven goal scorer, and they were going to spend big on a striker, and they have done, but they've done it on a striker who is not a proven goal scorer. So the risk it's not up for debate. It is a fact that it is a risk. And as I said, Ten Hag is a brilliant coach, and he's got a good track record with young players, and United banking on that, really. They're banking on Ten Hag's coaching, and they're banking on Hojlund having all the attributes and having that confidence that he will get there under Ten Hag. And maybe they see it as Hojlund hasn't had the absolute perfect coach to work under who can really properly tap into his potential. And maybe Ten Hag is that man. And if it does happen, then you have to doff your cap to them, because he will be doing it at just about the toughest level possible at the most scrutinised football club in the world.
Yeah, and if it does come off, he is the perfect age to get years out of him. And, I mentioned that sort of aging spine there before. I mean, they've done a lot this year now to refresh it. Obviously, Onana, 27, I think, replacing De Gea. Mount, 24, replacing Eriksen, who's 31. Now you've got 20-year-old strikers, so the age of that squad has reduced significantly this summer. That's all for part 2 of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll be back after the break to look ahead to the final weeks of the transfer window. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. Manchester United have the majority of their transfer business done. 3 new players in, around £180 million spent. It is pretty much job done. Some United figures are trying to suggest it is job done, and that will be the lot for the window. I think there's a possibility of that, but I think it's also probably too soon to call. There's still, three weeks or so of the window to go?
3 weeks Friday?
3 weeks Friday, I think. I think we're probably at a point now, Samuel, where maybe incomings are now dependent on outgoings.
Yes, and the reality is different from what gets written in certain countries, mostly Italy, regarding 1 or 2 players. But things can change very, very quickly. I think while we were in San Diego, the chance of Scott McTominay leaving started going up, and then Kobbie Mainoo gets injured and they start coming back down again, and McTominay is injured at the moment as well. So although I think it's the beginning of the end for him at United has started, and it looked like the end was possibly going to come sooner rather than later, maybe it will be later after all, and that's just how quickly things can change with a player. And we've seen already with Ahmad's injury, that's going to have a knock-on effect. With probably Pellistri, at the moment you'd think Pellistri won't go out on loan, and it would be strange if he did. I think that the line's gone live already this morning that Van der Beek, United are in discussions to sell him to Real Sociedad. They need to sell him. He's not good enough, and he hasn't been good enough for United pretty much the whole time he's been there. Dean Henderson is something that is still just bubbling away, and ideally United would have got that done sooner rather than later. They have been a bit more receptive to doing a loan with an obligation to buy, but they want that money guaranteed by January, because the cost of net spend and in compliance with the profitability and sustainability rules, that can be spread across both windows. So although there was all this talk about United having a £120 million budget, that the reality is that they were always able to spend more, and the cost of that can be offset by sales this summer and in the winter. So if they get the money for Henderson in January, that's ideal, but more ideal would be to get him sold now, really. But the problem is he's come back from an injury, and there's been, I think from Forest's perspective, they've been a bit tentative about it, but so far so good. Although he obviously hasn't played at all in pre-season, and he never was going to for United as well. It's pretty pointless as well. He's not so much he's not in the plans, but he's not going to play for them because he's a sellable asset. With Fred, I think we were told that's cooled. That was the phrase, wasn't it? Although Fulham are still in for him, Galatasaray haven't got anywhere near United's asking price. Maguire, it's dependent on him. If it comes to it where he goes to Ten Hag, says, look, I want to leave, and it sounds like he hasn't said that yet, but if he does say that, maybe that will escalate matters. I'm trying to think if there are any others. I don't think there's anyone else really, is there?
I guess the only other one is someone they won't really care about, but the ghost of centre halves passed in Eric Bailly, who's no one quite knows where he is. Absolutely ruthless from Ten Hag, but he's still being paid by United at the moment.
You just knew when they had that arrangement with Marseille last season, the obligation to buy, if Marseille qualify for the Champions League and Eric hits an appearance mark, you knew who was not going to hold up their end of the bargain there. So yeah, they are still saddled with Bailly. Absolutely ridiculous contract he got 2 years ago. Such a ridiculous contract. Even Solskjaer questioned, openly questioned possibly the merits of it on a Zoom call. I think is it at the moment it's clubs from Saudi Arabia or Turkey, like just whichever territory, just get him shipped off, put him in, box him up in a crate and go and take him to one of those places. It's a shame for him because he was very good in his first season for United, but since then it's just been downhill, and really silly injuries, some avoidable injuries as well. But I didn't realise that. I think in the Rangnick Solskjaer season, I think he was pretty much fit for the entirety of it, but he just didn't play beyond December. So he's been popular with supporters, and as I said, he had a really good first season. But really, he should not have got a contract in April 2021, I think it was. So I'm sure he'll have, the Bosphorus is lovely in Istanbul, I'm sure. And you just see how, the supporters out there, they was it Darius Vassell they mobbed at the airport that time all those years ago. They will mob any income in there. So hopefully for him, he can get a move, and hopefully for United, they get him off the books as well. There's just no sense to be keeping him, to the point where you even wonder if he doesn't get a move, do they just pay up his contract?
Yeah, incredible to think it was a card only 12 months ago, I think, when I suggested they might get £20 million.
That was certifiable.
That's why I'm sat here and not in John Murtaugh's office. But you never know, Al Hilal might come in and do the business for me yet. Yeah, I guess there's sort of two sets of outgoings. The ones we mentioned there, Henderson, Bailly, Fred, Van der Beek. I think we'd say they're all pretty much certain to happen and to leave. Obviously, the Fred one has gone cool. I think there's still an expectation he will go. And then there's Maguire and McTominay, where they're not being forced out the door. It's very much a case of see what offers come in, and then replacements will be needed. Fred and Van der Beek, whether they both go, whether Ten Hag says I need another midfielder, especially with Kobe Mainoo's injury. I think if Mainoo was fit,
there's an argument for that now.
There is an argument that he might say we need another midfielder, and obviously there's the Amrabat stuff where they've got an interest, but as you mentioned, being hard driven in Italy, and then the goalkeeper situation. You've done the story this morning. I think probably be live now about Tom Heaton staying.
Yeah, he's staying.
And it looks like he's probably going to be number 2. Maybe that'll leave Mate Kovar as number 3, although he didn't come on the US tour because he was expected to go on loan.
They took Nathan Bishop, who was then probably sold to Sunderland.
The goalkeeping situation still seems a bit of a strange one. I think we've both been very impressed with Tom Heaton in pre-season, and he's picked up the demands. He's a Nana-esque in his positioning. Yes. Something I'm not sure Sean Dyche ever knew he had that in his locker. But he has only played 2.5 games in 3 years. I think it is 3.5 years. It's an element of risk that he would be a number 2 as good as he's been. You do wonder if there's still maybe room there to sign another goalkeeper, and maybe it will be a Jack Botland-esque, Martin Dubravka-esque late deal for an experienced number 3 or something like that.
I'm sure if one of us just poured through all the Premier League and Championship clubs, you could settle on about a dozen names you'd say, yeah, I could see him going to United on a deadline day move for a loan fee. I think Richard Jolly, our colleague at The Independent, said at the weekend about Alex McCarthy at Southampton, and immediately think, yeah, you could see him going to United and just being a third choice backup. It's keepers of that profile. I certainly think that Ten Hag will want another senior or more experienced goalkeeper. Kovar is not a young goalie anymore. He's 23 and he played all of last season for Sparta Prague. So I think the strange thing was that United were talking about loaning him, because I'd have thought, given that he did well last season, and looking at how Ten Hag handles academy players, it's, well, if there's not a pathway for them there, what's the point loaning them? Just sell them, get the money in. Yeah. And you'd think they might be able to get a decent fee for him. From what I was told, there's quite a lot of interest in Kovar, but it's still that grey area where he could stay, he could go, and I don't think it's so much indecision as it's what's going on with the situation with other players, and Henderson is still one of them. If Henderson is somehow still marooned at United when the transfer window closes, then and Kovar is as well. It's disastrous for both of them, because they're two goalkeepers who left on loan last season to go and play, and it would be unfair on both of them as well. But when push comes to shove, clubs tend to blink eventually, and there's always a greater chance. I think nearer nearer the deadline, the chances of things getting done increase. I mean, there was talk with McTominay that he would actually look at he would assess his situation more closely to deadline, which seems a bit risky, but there's probably logic in it as well, because you're likely to trigger a spontaneous bid closer to deadline rather than something that's more long-winded. And West Ham like the look of McTominay, which I think we both thought was inevitable given that he's Scottish. David Moyes is Scottish. Moyes wants British players. He likes hard-working players. McTominay's agent, Colin Murdoch, played under Moyes at Preston North End 20-odd years ago, so there's a relationship there. But the problem is West Ham at the moment is a tough sell. And West Ham are a club that, like a couple of United players, McTominay one and Maguire the other. But if you're Harry Maguire, do you really want to be going to a club who haven't signed a player yet this summer, sold their best player, got tonked at the weekend? There's internal conflict there between the manager and the new head of recruitment, who is seemingly recommending players on the continent, and the manager wants British players. Already look at that and you think maybe Moyes should have just gone out on a high when they won the Conference League in June, because already he's got to be one of the favourites for the chop early in the season. You're looking at him. You're looking at Lopetegui at Wolves as well, because again, it's not all it's not panning out as he expected there. So from a player's perspective, why would you be inclined to leave that? And Maguire he's probably got to have at times a glass half full outlook and look at it and think, well, Varane is not a durable defender. Lindelof, if he has a bad game, then I come in, maybe I can go on a good run. That's the optimist outlook on it. I somehow expect it won't end out that way for Maguire, and still it's in his best interest to leave. But that's why it can be. It's not so much indecision. It's just when you're weighing up these options, it is. One morning you might wake up and think, yeah, definitely want to leave. Another morning they must think, no, why would I want to leave this? I'm happy here. There's going to be a lot of internal conflict for players in Maguire's position. But ultimately, United have not had an acceptable offer for him or for McTominay, and that's when it does where push does come to shove. Because if a club accept the fee for you, there and then they don't want you. They want rid of you. I
guess maybe the interesting one to watch with McTominay will be what we mentioned there. Fred and Van der Beek go, and Ten Hag wants a new midfielder and ends up with someone like Amrabat as a holding midfielder. It almost makes McTominay third choice.
Redundant, yeah. Well, I mean, Kobbie Mainoo was pretty much ahead of him
maybe it
on
makes him fourth choice, yeah. So that could change things later in the window. So, yeah, I think there's a few more twists and turns to come in this window yet, so don't log off just yet. Do stay tuned until September the 1st or whenever the window does close. That is all for now from today's episode of the Manchester is Red podcast. Thank you for your time, Samuel.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to the office straight from the Ryanair red eye from
Dublin. Yeah, T3 is if you've not experienced T3 at Manchester Airport, you don't want to experience T3 at Manchester Airport.
That's all for now, as I say. Do keep an eye on our social media channels on YouTube. We'll have plenty more video content for you during the week. There'll be another midweek podcast, and then Samuel will be back on Friday with someone, Rich or Steven, I would think. I'll be on a beach in Portugal, so I'll try and listen, but no guarantees. But I'm sure it will be an excellent podcast anyway. But that is all for now. Thank you for listening and joining us.